Okay, so why do I love the Enlightenment? You wouldn't understand it. I can't explain it to you unless I talk to you about my childhood. I grew up in a tribal environment. My grandmother who raised me, she and her family, when she was a little girl, they were going from waterhole to waterhole in what is now called Somalia. She had all sorts of stories about what life was like. But what strikes me is that she loved it and she respected it. And later on in life, when her children and grandchildren introduced her to modernity, she liked some stuff, but not all of it. So, in keeping with my grandmother's religious and tribal rituals and customs, at the age of 5, my genitals were cut. There was a rationale to that. The pain was inexplicable. But her rationale was, we've got to do this, even though you're only 5, we've got to do this because if we don't do this, the enemy across the other tribe, the other clan, is going to come and get us. And if you don't do this stuff, you're going to be someone's slave. Your children will be slaves. Your boys will be killed. And female genital mutilation, listen to me, I'm my grandmother. She's explaining her way of life and her thinking to me. Female genital mutilation is, of course, horrific, and it's striking, and it's dramatic, and all the rest of it. But it wasn't just that. On a day-to-day basis, she was enforcing manners, things that you do, things that you don't do, because you belong to this clan and not that clan. My grandmother could not read or write. And when I came home from school and I said, well, I had a fight with a little girl and I got my eyes poked out, she said, well, that shouldn't have happened. I'm going to teach you how to fight now. And I was then thrown into this ring where there was this, to you probably, again, inexplicable and horrific. But this girl is scratching me, punching me, rolling me in the sand, and I've got to do just as much back. And I hated it. I hated it. Her explanation remained the same. If you don't toughen up, they're going to come and get us all. So she was enforcing the norms, the rituals, the manners of her particular clan, even though life had moved on. And then my mother's life, who had moved on a little bit from my grandmother's to sort of semi-modern. My mother had left that moving from waterhole to waterhole, and she went to Aden. Her older sisters had sort of paved the way. I can see you doing this. Does it mean you can't hear me? I'm sorry. Does it make this? So, my grandmother then says to my mother, let me go back. My grandmother's world is crystal clear. Where her loyalties lie are crystal clear. Where her rationale lies is crystal clear. But when my mother she moves from the Somali nomadic desert and goes to Aden and starts to work for a British woman, English, white, things start to become ambiguous. There is an attraction, a very strong attraction. to modernity. And modernity comes in the shape and the form and the flavor of the white man. And so when, as a little girl, I'm listening to conversations between my mother and my grandmother, and they're talking about the white man. They talk about the white man in three different ways. The white man is dreadful because we had all of this stuff and he spoiled it. The white man was also spoken of with admiration. He did things that we couldn't do. He had all of these different clans and factions and so on to get together and to get along and be strong enough that they can come and invade and attack us. So there was something about the white man and his philosophy and his ways and so on that wasn't just mystic, but it was thought of as something to admire. And the white man was also spoken of with disgust. And the disgust part had to do with the way the white man treated his women. So when you saw white women, they were free, unchaperoned, unaccompanied, dressed as they pleased, roaming all over the place. And the female community around me would say they're absolutely out of their minds. If this carries on, they're going to be taken over. Now, fast forward, I grow up, my grandmother's nomadic way of life is completely overrun by modernity. My mother, who was sort of in that ambiguous, she loved the English woman that she worked for because she introduced her to modernity, taught her how to flush a toilet, what a running tap was, all of these things that I think you could put in a Disney movie in these days, but you can't because of woke is. And that's this. And so there's all this ambiguity. And so my mother's life is ambiguous. She has one leg in the old clan, tribal, Islamic system, and then she has one leg in whatever modernity brought her. Hannah, I'm looking at you. And one day she's in love with some of the material comforts that the white man brought. But the other day she's disgusted by what is happening to her children. When I was a teenager, this is 1984, 85, 86, Nairobi, Kenya, we're dancing to Michael Jackson. We're doing breakdance. We're watching MTV. We are through those images and narratives and the culture that is exported from America to Africa. We are behaving like teenagers, or we think we're behaving like teenagers in America. And this is disgusting to my mother and the rest of the female community. They hate it. We had this, I have got to stand up now. Maybe you can't hear me. Or maybe I can move it. It doesn't matter. I'll shout. Because I want to tell you, we had this like big speakers with the round, we were just making so much noise. That's what America was exporting. You think you saw a music genius. My mother and my grandmother, they saw noise, disruption, low culture, all the rest of it. So that was my mother's life. Then I started falling in love with it. And I read Nancy Drews, and I read Enid Blyton's, and I read everything that I'm supposed to read. And I start to imagine myself as an individual, untethered from this culture and tradition that is clan, tribal, and religious. And so by the time I come to the Netherlands, Somalia, or whatever Somalia was imagined to be, is completely falling apart. I'm 22 years old. I have even more reason to believe that the way my mother and my grandmother and their traditions and their religion did things was just simply awful because they couldn't keep their stuff together. We're all fleeing. We're